All right, good afternoon. My name is Robin Dolby, and I'm the From Land of Kansas Marketing Coordinator here at the Kansas Department of Agriculture. As many of you have probably already familiar with the From Land of Kansas program, we are the state's trademark program. We are designed to promote and celebrate agricultural experiences and products that are grown, raised, and produced here in our wonderful state of Kansas. Um, the program is also the central registration for Kansas farmers markets. Um, and as such, we do work to try to not only promote farmers markets, but also provide educational opportunities for market vendors and managers. So we're glad you've all joined us today for one of these sessions. So real quick, I would like to introduce my other two teammates that are with us on the Zoom. Sammy, could you introduce yourself?
Sure. Thank you, Robin. My name is Sammy Gleason, and I'm our From Land of Kansas program manager here at KDA. We're glad you're here. Thank you.
Jen.
I am Jen Hill. I'm the membership coordinator for the program and help onboard the new farmers markets as they sign up to be part of the central registration.
Perfect. Thank you. All right. Before we get started with our session today, I do have a few housekeeping items. This session is being recorded and we will post it on our website. If you have a question at any time, please feel free to type it in the chat, or you can also use the raise hand feature at the bottom. And at the end, we'll ask you to unmute and you can ask your question live if you'd like. So before we get started with Aaron, we would like to launch a quick poll. So you're going to get a pop-up on your screen. And it's got two questions, so you have to scroll down. The first question is, what is your current role with your farmers market? Whether it's a market manager, vendor, marketing, or market board member, volunteer, or other. Question two is, how many years have you been involved with your farmers market? So 0 to 1, 2 to 5 years, 6 to 10, or 10 or more years. So once you've answered both, you can hit the submit button. We'll give everybody just a second here to get those answered. All right, 100%, good deal. Everybody's answered. So let's end that and let's share the results. So it looks like a good majority of you are market managers. And question two, how many years have you been involved with farmers markets? 56% of you are, looks like pretty new. So, all right. Well, thank you guys for all taking that. Get out of that. Now I'd like to take a minute to introduce our guest speaker for today. Our speaker is Erin Bishop. She is with the Double Up Food Bucks program, the program manager with K-State Research and Extension. But Erin, if you've all may have met her, she is very, very knowledgeable, way beyond that. And she works extensively with farmers markets. And so we asked her to come on today and provide her expertise in helping new markets or just providing some tips for markets getting started. So Erin, would you mind going ahead and giving a little more of an introduction yourself? And we'll turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you, Robin. Hello, everyone. I'm going to share my screen here. So can you give me the thumbs up, Robin, that you can see that? Okay, great. My computer decided it wanted to give me a bunch of updates at the same time. So my name is Erin. As Robin said, I know there's quite a few folks on this call that I know well. And so I want to also recognize that there's a lot of expertise in this room. And so after my introductions, I would really like for you all to put in the chat your name, your market location. Some of you are probably at more than one market, and what you're most excited about for the 2025 season. That picture of me is what I look like in my community garden. I'm highly involved in the Manhattan Community Garden, which is the longest operating community garden in Kansas. But this is my 6th season working with Double Up Food Bucks at K-State Research and Extension. And so I've had the opportunity and the pleasure of connecting with tons of great folks in farmers markets across the state of Kansas. With the Double Up Food Bucks program, I cover the entire state of Kansas, so that's everything I should say except for Kansas City. My colleagues at Cultivate KC manage Double Up Food Bucks at those locations. Double Up Food Bucks, just to briefly explain, is a nutrition incentive program that matches SNAP, Supplemental Nutrition Assistance, or what we formerly called food stamps. It matches those to encourage SNAP spending at a market by doubling a customer's dollars up to $25 a day. And so then our farmers are moving more perishable produce, dollars are staying local, and we're improving the healthy food access of our neighbors. And so, yeah, I also want to state that this is going to be a very kind of an interactive presentation. On a lot of my slides, I've got a question at the bottom that is in black. Everything else is in purple because I'm not K-State if I don't put it all in purple. So feel free to answer that in the chat for yourself to share with your colleagues in this call, or raise your hand and I'd love to have you speak as well. So again, recognizing that there's a ton of expertise in this room that probably could teach a lot of these slides even better than I could. So with that, we'll get started. Really excited to see some familiar faces. And I know we have some new market managers with Double Up Food Bucks on this call as well. So that's exciting. Okay, so to start off, and I'm going to show these slides at the end, so you don't need to QR code or write them down yet if you don't want to, but the majority of the information that I used to put this presentation together comes from a couple of resources. The first one is from New York, the Farmers Market Federation. They have a really detailed guide on starting a community farmers market. It goes through things list by list. They've got really great appendices, I think is the proper word on that, where you can gather vendor contracts, market surveys, layouts, all kinds of things. Super helpful. It's about 60 some pages. So I would recommend if you're working on starting a market or as a new market manager, kind of scanning some of that information for updates. And then of course, the Kansas Department of Ag has a really great guide for starting Kansas farmers markets. They've got all of the links that you need to connect with things like the fun topics of taxes, and special events and stuff like that. And again, I'm going to show this at the end of the presentation. And then of course, I don't go into this, but the food safety guide that KDA and K-State Extension updates annually is available in print copy or in digital copy. And that's how you get that. It's going to answer all your questions about the food safety and regulations and best practices. It's what I reference when I get an email from a rural market asking what the rules are for selling rabbit meat, or when I get questions about all kinds of different things, jams and jellies. This is the guide that I go to. And again, I'll show this at the end so you have those resources. So I know a lot of you really know this information, but I just want to highlight that when I'm talking to folks or communities about farmers markets, I'm doing so with the definition that a farmers market is farm direct marketing. It provides an opportunity and access for producers and growers and farmers in both urban and rural areas to sell their goods directly to consumers. And it's an opportunity for our consumers of our community to shop for locally grown and produced foods. It is a business incubator, so markets provide a venue for new businesses and businesses that have been around a while, a place to sell. Farmers markets are a lot of small independent businesses under one larger umbrella. And our farmers markets provide multiple health, nutrition, and economic benefits to a community. This data comes from the Farmers Market Coalition, and in 2020, they found that the producers of farms that sold local across the US were predominantly under the age of 34 and female. So oftentimes when we think of farmers markets, we may not think of that as a vendor that we would typically see, but that is really a lot of those small businesses coming in under farmers markets. They do provide a low barrier entry point for new farmers, which is a continued reason that I think it's important we advocate for farmers markets. And also the Farmers Market Coalition, their research found that direct marketing farmers experience lower rates of farm business failure or bankruptcy than growers that sell exclusively wholesale. So I think that this is a key point to highlight when we're talking with our communities and our boards and folks on why farmers markets are economic impact, why they matter for things like your chamber and organizations like that. And 72% of consumers across the nation, and I would guess that this number is probably a little lower in Kansas, but that they know nothing or very little about farming and ranching. And so farmers markets really provide that invaluable educational bridge. Okay, so that's the background. Now we're going to get started in things like starting a community market, or if you operate a community farmers market, what that might look like for improvements, areas that you can grow that market for your community. So the first thing we're going to talk about are locations, days, and times. How do you figure that out? How do you set that up? The image that you see on the screen here is taken from that New York Federation of Farmers Markets community guide. And it's this is just a section of it, but it is a 2-page graphic or chart that allows you to evaluate specific locations you are either considering starting a market at, or if your market has the opportunity or the need to move or grow, and you start looking at different locations. It provides a really great rubric for scoring and judging. They do recommend that a group of folks do their own scoring, and then you kind of compare. And so some of the key things they want you to look for are the visibility. Of course, we all know foot traffic and car traffic by your location increases and encourages people to stop and shop. We want it to be a safe foot traffic space so people can get there easily. Thinking about room for future expansion. I know the Manhattan, Kansas Farmers Market just announced today on Facebook that they're adding a couple more rows to their farmers market in the parking lot. So that's huge growth and really exciting. A thing I get a lot is thinking about the surface and how it will impact mobility for the folks shopping at the market. A lot of the markets may have elderly folks with walkers or a little unsure on their steps. And so having paved or safe grounding for them to navigate is really important for your customer safety. Of course, shade is always nice, not guaranteed, but does help, especially if your market is an evening market in the summer. Some vendors would, encourage for access and water, electricity, things like that. If you've got built-in restrooms, that's always great. But of course, porta potties are something that many markets use as well. You definitely don't want a customer having to leave your market to use the restroom because they may not return to do some more shopping. So thinking about services you can provide for your customers to stay in space. On-site storage is huge. I think anybody that's a market manager in this call can really attest to the amount of stuff that you're dragging back and forth each market week to set up. I know Double Up Food Bucks, we have signage that is quite heavy. Tabling for your info booths and shade structures and all of that. So thinking of where you can store things that make that job easier and cut down on staffing time to set up. Of course, zoning permits are always a big deal. And then customer flow and how the vendors are set up, which we'll talk about. So if you have anything you want to share, the question on this slide is, what's your favorite thing about your market location? I see markets all over in lots of different ways, whether it's downtown on a square or under a community pavilion in a park. I see all kinds of examples, and I think all kinds of examples are a really great way to showcase the community. Just to get a little deeper into the location, day, and time. As far as your location, you want to consider higher populated areas. places where, you know, if you're wanting to be a market where families are shopping on a Saturday morning, where will those families be at? How can you meet them? If you're wanting to capture folks when they're leaving work on an evening to do their grocery shopping at the market, where are those folks leaving employment that they'll drive by or walk by your farmer's market? And then, of course, thinking of those things we already talked about, restrooms and facilities. Remembering that, you know, what you set your time for, the average I see is 1.5 to about 4 hours. And so considering that a 3-hour farmer's market really is a 5 to 7 hour commitment on that day for both your vendors and your staff. Your timing should be dictated by your customers. Again, we talked about where the families are or when people are getting off of work. I don't work with a lot of markets that are during a weekday during the day. I do have a few, but it's mostly evenings and weekends. And of course, our growing season in Kansas determines when our markets end and start and end oftentimes, particularly if we're a produce heavy market. I think also considering the day of the week, if you are working on starting a farmer's market, the biggest thing you can do when you're determining your day of the week is take stock of when the other markets in the area are operating. You do not want to be in customer competition or, quite frankly, vendor competition with other markets. If there's a market down the road that's on a Saturday morning, you having a market on a Saturday morning may limit your ability to gather vendors or customers. In larger communities, that's not a problem. There's often more vendors and quite a bit of space across town. But in our more rural communities, you kind of want to be looking even at the county surrounding you. And you know, going to those markets on those days, if you're starting a market and talking to the vendors to see if they'd like to add an additional day would also be helpful. So for those of experts in the community, I see some really great responses. Thanks, Emily and Mary, who I know really well, both of you, for talking about what you like about your location. If anybody would like to share why they chose the day and time of their market, that might be helpful for other folks on the call that are learning and interested in starting a market, that would be great. Or feel free to raise your hand too. And I know Robin will help me and Sammy will help me check on those. Another thing included in that guide that I shared is the suggestion of doing a customer survey. So you kind of talk with your vendors, you kind of get your days down, you're thinking of when you might have it. And they suggest doing sampling surveys with customers at that location. You know, if it's an evening market and you're wanting to set up maybe in a downtown pavilion, to kind of go downtown on an evening, a couple of evenings on that same day of the week and do some surveys with potential customers and asking them their experiences and what would be helpful for them for a market. Again, that guide has this, you could just pull from it and copy from it like I did and use it as your survey. You can, of course, add things that you want to it. That might give you just some good ideas. I'm not sure if anybody on the call has completed a vendor survey, or I'm sorry, a customer survey, but if you have, please feel free to share. We do evaluate our Double Up Food Bucks customers at a random sampling plan on their experience with our program, but also just their experience shopping local. And so what we hear constantly is that customers like, oftentimes if they're bringing their families, they like that it's a time they can shop with their families. They're not really traveling great distances to those markets. It's pretty local. And that they like having, you know, a big selection of stuff. And Claudia, thank you so much for sharing that you do offer customer surveys and stuff like that. And it does give a good idea of things you should change for next season. So also a great idea doing a during the season survey to ask what have been the good experiences of the customers and what are areas for improvement. And Emily says that their time was chosen in 1976. That's amazing, 1976. And the times have changed, but it's currently so your farmers markets don't have to travel so early in the morning and set up. Yes, and the hot summer being done when it's not super hot is also helpful. And Olivia says the farmer's market is on Sundays from 10 to 2 in El Dorado, and we're excited to have that location to double up this year to tap into the after church crowd and the folks downtown. Very excellent. Thank you all for sharing. Okay, so the really fun stuff is the rules. I know that every market I work with has different rules. So the list that I've pulled here is really just things that I have seen and had market managers tell me about across the state. And so a lot of markets I work with have different definitions of who's qualified to set up at the market. Some markets have a requirement that you grow it yourself. I work with one market I know that does site visits with the vendors. They go and do an evaluation of their farming or baking, whatever creative operation that is, before they're allowed to sell, so they can confirm that it is locally grown, locally produced. Markets defining what local means. Some markets are, you grow it yourself, local only. Some markets have a radius for Double Up Food Bucks produce match. It's 500-mile radius, which is pretty large. We go by what the market defines as local. If that market does not define anything as local, then we define it by 500-mile radius. I do work with some markets that have items that they purchase in bulk from the distributor and also sell at their market. Those markets that do that are often requiring those vendors to label where those items were grown. But again, that's all based on the market's own decisions, that market board or the market manager's rules. I do encourage that your market rules definitely state that farmers and vendors must adhere to state and federal regulations. Always important. KDA can really help us out with those state regulations, questions that we might have. Setting up and tear down times. I have some markets that, if a vendor sells out and they finish selling their items for the day, and they're out, they are not allowed to leave that market until the end of the market time. Understandably, it keeps from having blank spots in the market flow. Also, kind of packing up during a market flow could be disruptive, and so they have that rule. I do work with other markets that don't have that rule. They have vendors that may have a low quantity of items to sell each day, and so when they sell out, it's that vendor is okay to leave. I think it all is really dependent on what your market, how it operates and what it finds valuable. The same thing with the policy of leaving early and arriving late, like I just said. I work with some markets that require vendors to post prices visible for other customers walking by. It keeps the competition secure and can keep prices from fluctuating to avoid maybe customer discontent with those kind of things. But other markets do not require that. So of course, that's all on a decision. I work with a lot of markets that start on a bell. So this is to prevent a vendor from setting up early, and then the customers are showing up early, particularly evenings or after work or something. If they set up and then a vendor comes early, sets up, sells everything, and then when the other vendors get there, there's less customer base. That can kind of cause some conflict with vendors or with a vendor with the market. So that's starting on a bell or a whistle. I see all kinds of different things. And I have other markets, of course, that don't have those rules. I think it's whatever your board and what works best for you. A lot of markets I work with don't allow for the hawking or the yelling for your prices or the stopping customers as they pass, creating noise distractions for others. And then vendor insurance requirement that protects the vendor from liability, but also the market from liability. And then I put this one last, allowing dogs or other pets. This is always a hotly debated topic. I probably see markets split 50-50 of dogs and no dogs. That dog you see is actually my neighbor's dog, Nala, and she goes to the Manhattan Farmers Market often, and they post this lovely picture of her on their Facebook page, so I swiped it for this. But is there any other rules for some of those more seasoned farmers market managers or vendors that I may have missed on this list? If you have anything to share. or if you have any questions about the rules or why someone would choose a rule that they do, please feel free to ask it on the chat. And yes, Emily says smoking and vaping is not allowed at the market. Yes, and I think that that goes for most markets, although I'm not sure if it's a rule for everyone. I do know the smoking and the vaping as well. Those rules, if you're working under specific grants, like healthy community grants, no smoking and vaping or being a smoke-free facility location is one of those rules. I think it also makes it comfortable for most customers. And I do know that if you've got a vendor selling, especially earlier season, selling plants, things like the tobacco mosaic virus can really affect a tomato plant crop. Thank you for sharing that, Emily. And defining boundaries of the market. Yeah, Emily, do you want to pop in and tell us a little more about that, or type it if you don't want to chat or talk, I guess I should say.
Sure, that's fine. What I mean by that is like, so we are in two parking lots and we have to define the boundaries for various reasons. Things that are allowed in and outside the market, like, we only allow vendors who are part of our membership to sell. But if you pop up on the outside and on the sidewalk, there's nothing we can do to regulate that. And there's always people, like, we also don't allow hawking at the market, but people can pass out flyers to people outside of the market. So having those defined boundaries, or if you get to a point where you like allow a sip and shop or something like that, figuring out how to define the boundaries. We also use with people who come in between booths and around booths, and that's just unfortunately how our market works. But um I would think about, your definition. Oh, I like what Mary said, cleaning location and trash stuff. That's usually with who you're partnering with the city.
Oops, thank you so much, Emily and Mary as well. Yes, Emily, that's a really good point. And I have seed markets with their rules where there are folks that may not like those rules, so they'll set up across the street in a parking lot to sell their items. So having defined boundaries then also protects you from liability and things like that. Emily, you and Mary both, I knew I would be calling on you for your experience. I was excited to see you both on the registration list. Okay. Let me go to the next one. So vendor recruitment. That's another big thing, is getting vendors on board. Can't really have a market if you don't have the vendors, of course. So things that your market's going to need to consider. Number one are vendor fees. A lot of the smaller markets I work with do not have vendor fees. They do not charge vendors a fee. They're trying to get up and going. They're a new market. They have very few vendors. And a vendor fee may be cost prohibitive to having those vendors show up and sell at the market. And so those costs are often underwritten by a Main Street Coalition or a chamber or a community foundation, something like that. A lot of the larger, more established markets I work with, of course, do have a vendor fee, and those vendor fees cover lots of things like the implementation of the SNAP Double Up incentive and other incentive programs, the marketing, the outreach, the community identity, and all of that. Of course, making sure that your vendor spaces, the booth, the selling space, you have a system in place for, especially if you're charging vendor fees, someone gets a double space, 2 spaces, they're paying maybe more than someone that has a single space. But thinking of ways that you can have boundaries and borders for each of your vendors so they have somewhat equal space and connection in that. Thinking about when you're recruiting vendors, a lot of your vendors may be coming with big trucks or trailers that they sell out of. They've got a whole system. So do you need to be a market that requires a vendor to set up on a table and then move their truck? Or do you have space for those that are selling out of a trailer or have a setup that's a little non-traditional as far as table and tent, that they can have that parked there? What days can your vendors attend? Of course, we've talked about that. For those that are in that have some experience, if you could tell us in the chat, particularly what you're doing by assigning spaces. Like how, if you have assigned spaces at your market, do you assign those by cost, by seniority, first come, first serve? Do folks get the same? And Emily, if you were popping on to talk, that would be great too. Feel free to do that rather than type.
Okay.
I'm really glad you're here.
Hey, sure. So ours is by seniority, but also first come, first serve. So everybody has to apply. And you have like we have like a date that you have to apply by, and then you get your reserve stall if you're a returning vendor. If you don't get your application in by then, we will probably check in with you multiple ways to make sure you didn't want to reserve that. And if we don't hear from you and you don't have a plan, we will then open up your stall space to give it away. For the first time in my 5 years, we will be full this year. And we will be like, we run a whole floater system then. Like, so if you're a new vendor, you're a floater for the first year. So you don't get an assigned stall and you get potentially moved around. And that will be a whole challenge for our new market manager, Lindsay, who is with us on this call today, about how to move floaters around and what that's going to look like. We started for the first time this year using a market management software called MarketWorks. We wrote a grant for that. So this is our first pilot program year using that. And I would love in the chat if any other Kansas markets are using any market management software, because this is our first time.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Emily. And that's cool about your software. I'm excited to learn more. And Mary at the Breadbasket Market in Topeka says she assigns spaces what works best for the vendors. Some vendors don't want to face the sun. So yeah, thinking about that as well. Consider having vendor contracts. Again, that guide from the New York Federation of Farmers Markets does have sample vendor contract in there you can take. It's also really great to just do a Google search. I can also provide you with some example vendor contracts from some markets I work with that I have permission to share. So feel free to email me if you've got those questions. And always remember that more vendors means more options for your customers. I sometimes work with farmers markets that may not want to take on, we've already got 2 produce vendors and they might not want more, but thinking that sometimes more vendors actually brings in more customers. And that image is from that Federation guide, of course, but it's a vendor market application. So that pre-season application, if you've got folks. I've worked with markets that have, most markets I've worked with have turned down vendor applications that have applied. I think that's just part of it. So having a detailed application so you can really tailor the type of market you want to be, if that's locally grown, majority food, whatever that looks like. And Emily says vendor contracts are necessary for us for a variety of reasons, but also insurance. Yes. Thank you for that. And I'm sorry, I said Mary Tyler when I was talking about the first come, first serve, but it's Mary Morris. So my apologies on that, Mary. There's 2 Marys on here, I think. And then of course, I apparently really like surveys, and I also supervise students that do farmers market double up surveys. But I think getting data from the folks that know the best is the way that we can improve. So when you're starting a market or you're trying to recruit new vendors, some questions you may want to be thinking about when you're deciding a location and a day and all of that is a distance a vendor would be willing to drive. And of course, what market days of the week would they be interested in? I'm working with a new market right now that has it's a pretty, what we would call a frontier county in Kansas, meaning there's very few people per 1,000 in how that county land is versus the population. And so they were talking with vendors that would be traveling 45 minutes to an hour to sell at their market, at the new market. And so this new market manager assumed that, this big produce vendor is selling on Saturday. So maybe they would like a Thursday market to kind of think about, when you pick and when you package and when you go to sell, that would work out best for that schedule. But that produce vendor and actually another produce vendor that would be coming an hour from the other direction or 45 minutes from the other direction, both said Tuesdays actually would work better based on our timing for picking and harvesting and packaging. having it Tuesday and then Saturday works out best for our schedule and when we would have items ready to go. So that person then adjusted their plans from a Thursday market to a Tuesday market to accommodate those vendors. It's a really small market and vendors are kind of harder to come by in that area. So without that vendor survey, they may not have been as successful in getting the vendors that they want at the market. That market also has some grant funds, so at least 50% of the food sold at the market has to be produce, fresh fruits and vegetables. So that could have affected their grant funding as well without that opportunity. Vendors also have a lot of experience on times and days that work and when people like to shop. So asking them for that information is really helpful. Of course, knowing what months they'll have products to sell. If the majority of the vendors, the produce vendors say that you recruit are tomato, melon, and corn vendors, they might not be ready to go until June. You know, seeing if you've got vendors that are doing some of the cold crops, you know, the colder weather stuff and the greens, carrots, onions, making sure you have vendors that will be able to have items for sale earlier in the year is important when you're setting your schedule. Vendors may have pretty strong opinions on what they think, what kind of products should be sold. I talk to vendors all over the state that have different opinions on locally grown, what is locally grown, and what you should sell. Southeast Kansas oftentimes has Amish produce auctions. If you've never been to one, they're very fascinating. And so you may have some vendors there that are buying large quantities of produce from an auction and then reselling those at a market. And some markets may be okay with that. Many markets may not be okay with that. So vendors will oftentimes tell you, I only want to sell at a market that's vendor grown, that's farmer grown, grown by the person selling it. I would also ask your vendors what type of services they want. Of course, things like electricity and water is really helpful, but you know, do they want credit and debit as a payment option to be operated by the market rather at a vendor level? Do they want any kind of other services that would be helpful? And they may have suggestions for ideal locations as well. So something to think about. You can get really great vendor survey forms in that that federation guide as well. And so there's obviously lots of opportunities to think about layout. It's suggested that your walkways between vendors, if you've got vendors facing each other or side to side, that those walkways be at a minimum of 6 feet, but ideally probably 10 feet. So you have room for customers to shop for a couple of feet in front of either one of the booths, as well as a good amount of space for walking down the aisles. That then also provides space for families with young kids to walk side by side, people in wheelchairs, all kinds of things like that to consider. So really measuring out your layout. They give 2 examples here, kind of like a circle and then a straight back and forth. And we've already answered the question is, do you give your vendors the same spot each week? But if you are a market with a different kind of layout than what's shown here, if you would share that in the chat, that might be really helpful for some of the newer folks on the call that are just starting up a market or just starting as market manager. And on top of that, I guess now would be a good time to ask how you may handle vendor conflicts if you have vendor conflicts that are vendors next to each other. I might call on Emily because I know her well, or Mary Tyler because I know them well. Emily, can you tell us how you handle vendor conflicts? Do you have a process for that?
This was a really great question we asked in our interview process, let me say, of how would you handle vendor conflicts? We have a grievance form if absolutely needed. So that was created more so for vendors. So we are a producer only market. So we don't allow reselling of any products. So the grievance form was created if somebody is like, hey, they brought peaches from Colorado. And then we go through a whole process to like check on that and do that kind of thing. As far as like other vendor conflicts that might happen, it's usually kind of more, hey, they're in my stall space. or they've, they're taking up too much space or they're doing this. I might let my new market manager take this on because she had a wonderful response if she remembers and she feels comfortable jumping in. It was something we asked in the interview process of how would you handle maybe like space disagreements or things like that. Lindsay, don't feel like you have to jump it in. I know you have work at once. Maybe you're driving even, but I'll jump back in if nobody else wants.
Can you hear me okay? I'm on my phone, so the microphone, I'm not 100%
Yep.
sure.
We can
Okay,
hear
cool.
you. Thank you.
No worries. I am in a parking lot. That's fine. If I'm remembering correctly, I think one of the biggest things that I stated in my interview is that I think some preliminary conflict resolution, maybe before the market even starts, is necessary. So for this situation in particular, vendor spaces are smaller than they were last year. So I think part of my answer was talking about how it would be good to let vendors know that there will be a tight amount of space that they will have, and potentially offering them resources for how they can better organize their stall in that smaller space. So I was thinking more in a prevention sense, but if there was conflict at the market, I think ultimately listening to what their grievance is, trying to get to the root of what their concern is, and then taking some time to think about that, mediate it, and come up with a solution that works well for everyone.
Thank you so much, Lindsay, and welcome aboard with the Lawrence Farmers Market. Claudia has a really great answer too I wanted to share, and thank you, Emily, by the way. Claudia says we have a board and all conflicts go through the board. So that's really great. If you've got, I think farmers market boards are important. Most markets probably all have a board or some kind of committee that's overseeing and creating those rules like we talked about with market bylaws and stuff like that. So having a process there. I think vendor conflict is something that most markets have experience with. I think very few markets can come to the end of the season without something like that. And I think it's just helpful to remember that a farmer's market is an umbrella of lots of businesses, lots of small businesses operating next to each other and very close. And so as humans, that's just going to be part of the process. So making sure your vendors know at the start of the year how they can effectively deal with conflict and what the steps and the processes are of your market for dealing with that conflict, so they have that information to start with. And Emily also says, or Claudia also says, it gives the board time to deliberate and get different perspectives, which I think is great. Hearing all sides of the story, and basic conflict resolution kind of techniques and skills, giving people a space to be heard, to be listened to and heard with maybe their grievances or their issues, sometimes makes all the difference even without the action, so that folks know that they're heard. And then Emily also says that they lean into guidelines on how to deal with, to manage vendors and the rules that they agree to. Those contracts that you sign with vendors, which would include all your market rules, can be a reminder to that vendor that, hey, you have agreed to all of these rules going forward, or for this season. So that provides you a little bit of protection and cushion that vendor has that knowledge. Okay, so then kind of thinking about how you market your market. This is kind of a little busy slide, but what you see in this picture is the Kansas Grown market is in Wichita. They do a tomato fest every year. It's a big farmers market day. They have people come and do face paintings that paint your face like a tomato kind of stuff, or maybe other face paintings too. They have like a person doing balloon animals or balloon fruits and vegetables, all kinds of stuff. It's a big day. They've got samples of different kinds of tomatoes. And so then this vendor, which of course is not a produce vendor, but they make pet treats. And I found them when I was just Googling the Tomato Fest for some examples. So for every purchase that someone made at their booth on Tomato Fest, they got a koozie that says, "I love farmers markets from my head to my toes," which I thought was really cute. So thinking about outreach, social media. Of course, social media is huge. If you've got the advertisement money, doing social media advertisements and stories and in posts is really helpful. It gets a lot of eyes on it. Of course, newspaper, radio, merchandising, like I've shown you with the koozie, and then special events are huge. Having music, having a food truck day, contests, demonstrations, children's events are really helpful. If you've got any special events that you've hosted, feel free to please share that in the chat or some unique ways you've marketed. Claudia shares with us in the chat that they do a Meet Your Farmer Day so people can meet the farmers and ask about how they're grown. That sounds like a really fun day, Claudia. I would be excited to attend that. I know that families and kids learn so much from learning how their food grows, and I think it also gives children an opportunity to be more comfortable trying new fresh fruits and vegetables. Emily wears many costumes. Emily's got a closet full of really awesome food costumes. She's always got something new and very creative and very fun. I will say the Lawrence Farmers Market does a scavenger hunt with like a picture of a fruit or a vegetable of some sort that the kids find, and then they take it to the info booth and get like a sticker as a prize. My friend's little kid who lives in Lawrence loves going to the scavenger hunt. It's her favorite thing. And Mary Tyler at Topeka says they've had a car show, which is awesome. I'm sure that also brings a lot of new customers because you may have people that are really interested in cars and vintage and antique cars coming, and now they're shopping at a market. Now they're comfortable shopping at a market. Nutrition education, loyalty cards. I work with a market in Western Kansas that does a market basket drawing once a month. So the last day of the market, they get just like onions or just small little items from vendors if they want to give. Vendors are not required to give, but if a vendor wants to give a small item to add, anybody that shops at that market with each vendor, I think that they spend with, they get an entry into the drawing. And then there's a drawing kind of at the end of the market day, and they will call that customer up and they get to take the basket home with the lots of different goodies. They heavily market that on social media too. So it just kind of gets people excited and to shop with more vendors so they get more tickets. Kids at the market once a month, Mary says, also really great. Anytime we can encourage children to come to the market and make it a family event, really can bring a lot of return customers because a family will go with their kid. It becomes educational, it becomes fun. You know, young families are often saying there's not enough for us to do in our community. And so those markets providing a space for that really gets those repeat customers as well. Yes, and then Emily also says having community partnership booths. So having other groups come in and share. I've been at farmers markets where the extension is there and they're bringing the smoothie bike and they're making smoothies or they're doing blood pressure checks, all kinds of different services, but that is also providing education on different services that our community offers. And feel free to keep sharing those great ideas in the chat. I've had all kinds of things like tractor days. I mean, all kinds of fun stuff that I've seen. Okay, and then just thinking about your signage, these are signs of markets that I work with. I think it's really helpful for you if you're starting a market or you're a newer market to consider a place where you can have a permanent sign where people drive by and they see it on a Tuesday to remember to come on a Saturday. What you see on the left here is the Columbus Farmers Market in Southeast Kansas. That is their permanent sign that's up at their location. The other side is the double up Food Bucks banner. It's kind of on a main highway at the edge of town, so people are driving by it every day and that sign stands out. And then, of course, your temporary signs that you set up on the edge of your boundaries to remind people. Old Town in Wichita, there's an A-frame sandwich type board that they set up, as well as Cotton's Farmers Market sign, which I really love. It's hand painted. If you haven't been to the Cotton's Farmers Market in Lawrence as well, also a great market. And so they set that up for display kind of on the street because the market is in the parking lot behind. So people then as they drive by see that. I have other markets that are very intentional about displaying the rules. And I have found that to be super helpful, particularly if they have a no pets rule or something like that, no dogs. If that's displayed and someone walks in with a dog, they can immediately say, oh, unfortunately, here are the rules. And then, of course, having vendors post signs on, what they take especially SNAP and double up and things like that, which I'll talk about in a second. Really thinking through those vendor requirements. And Mary also said that they do a kids corner, so free art activities at their market, which is awesome. Another way to get kids there and give families something to do. So kind of as we're coming to the end of my presentation here, I really wanted to talk with everyone about nutrition incentive programs because that's what I do. If your market does not offer SNAP, Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or what we formerly called food stamps, as a payment option, I would highly consider your market think about that. These are important healthy food access points in our community, and folks on food assistance also want to buy local food, healthy food for their families. To take those cards, you do have to go through a process with the USDA, an application process to be approved to accept SNAP. But there is a grant called MarketLink, and I will put that in the chat. It's marketlink.org. And you can get assistance with that application and then free equipment and a free app to accept the payment for a year. And if you do accept that payment for a year and you get $500 in sales, you get the second year free as well. So it's a pretty good deal. The only cost then that comes to your market is the cell phone or the tablet. It's a bring your own device to accept that payment. And then the cost of the tokens or the other script. So in that picture here, you see the blue tokens from the Manhattan market are their SNAP script, which represents $1 of SNAP that customers spend with the vendors. And those cards are like debit cards. The money goes right into the account. If you are a SNAP location, please consider talking to me about Double Up Food Bucks. That's the program I work in. We work with locations that have SNAP as a payment to provide more funds, double the funds to customers so they can buy more fresh fruits and vegetables. And that is a grant program under the USDA. We do work with SNAP, so you have to accept SNAP to be eligible. Some markets we work with have triple match. Mary Tyler on this call with Breadbasket does a triple match every day at her market for SNAP and Double Up. She's got a private donor that provides that, which is really great. Kansas Senior Farmers Market Nutrition Program. Look in and see if your county offers that through KDHE. That is a vendor level benefit. So seniors that are eligible get a book of checks that they can spend directly with the vendors on produce. Thank you, Robin. And then the vendors cash that in, so there's no pass through with a market booth. But it's a great way to bring more seniors into your market. Sunflower Health Vouchers, so the kids chip the state health insurance for children, and Sunflower Health Vouchers partners with lots of different farmers markets across the state, and they'll set up for a day. They do a mailer to those families with kids on the Sunflower Health come in, they get a $10 voucher to spend at the market, each kid on the plan, and they spend those with the vendors, and it's just one day of a year per market. So if you don't have Sunflower Health coming in, you may want to look in and see if that's something you can set up this year. I can always tell a Sunflower Health Day on SNAP and Double Up data because those numbers are always much higher. And then Power of Produce or Kids at the Market, like Mary does, are programs where kids come and they do activities where they try new fruits and vegetables, and they're given a couple of dollars to go shopping at the market for their own produce. That program is usually funded by private donors or a community foundation. But if you do have any interest on setting that up or who to talk to, please reach out to me and I can put you in contact with some great folks that do it that may be able to provide you with some examples. Okay, and then lastly, as I wrap up, I know we're kind of running out of time, to complete an end of season market evaluation, asking people if they liked the times and the dates and what their experiences were, if they felt that they had an adequate choice of products. You can ask your vendors what their estimated revenue was. See if you need to change your layout from year to year. It can also give you a good idea on the impact of your local economy. So when you're going and asking your foundation for funds for a Power of Produce for kids, you could say, look at what we've already provided this economy. We can add to that if you help us by bringing more customers in, by funding a nutrition education program for children. If you've completed a market evaluation before, please include it in the chat and tell me if you found anything surprising or how that was helpful. Again, you can get really great evaluation surveys from that. that guide that I shared, which I will show you the link to here in a second. So as I'm kind of butting up right to the end of the time, does anybody have any questions or like just things that I didn't cover that you'd really like to know or ask the group for more information about? Feel free to unmute or type it in the chat. And while I do that, I'm going to pull up those QR codes again in case you're interested of capturing the website or the downloading it onto your phone or device for those resources. I also want to thank everybody that jumped in with their with sharing for the new market managers and newer folks here. It's really helpful to learn from peers. I think it's just super valuable.
All right. Do we have any more questions for Erin? Well, thank you, Erin, very much for your time. We appreciate all your time and your expertise in this session today. I'm trying.
And I'll put my email in the chat again in case folks didn't get that.
Okay.
If you've got questions, feel free to email me.
Perfect. All right. Thank you. A couple of things before we drop off here. We do have 2 more sessions coming up on the next 2 Tuesdays, so the 8th and the 15th. I've dropped the link to where you can register for those workshops in the chat. Also, to ask one of my teammates to drop in the email address. If you're a farmer's market that is already registered with us, we really love to have your updated information, your market information in our directory and on our maps so consumers can find you and have accurate information of your hours, contact information, your Facebook, your social media links, and all of those things. So email at fromlenakansas@ks.gov. It's in the chat there. Email us any of your updates. If you're not registered or if you're a market that's getting going, we would encourage you to get registered with us so consumers can find you in our directory and on our map as well. So, all right.
And Robin, I will say I use your guys' directory a lot for contact information for markets that I may have heard about in passing. Someone will say, hey, have you talked to someone at this farmer's market? They were mentioned they're interested in SNAP. And so your directory is super helpful. And so I know I use it, so I'm sure a lot of people use it.
Good, good. All the more reason to have that information updated. So, all right. Well, thank you all.
Robin, I think there was one
Oh,
more question in the
I
chat.
see that. So the next 2 sessions, it was similar format. They will be just an hour long over the noon hour. The next one is going to be, we're going to have some more seasoned market managers on a panel in the session on April 8th. And then honestly, the one on the 15th is a chance to network. We're planning to do some breakout rooms, especially if we have enough attendees and have some guided questions, but it'll be a chance just to have discussion to learn from each other and honestly just meet and network with each other. So that one will be on the 15th. So thank you all. And with that, we'll end our session. Have a good rest of your afternoon.
Thanks, everyone.